How's it going, everyone? Nick Templin here from Templin Scouting, and today we're going to be taking a look at my very first 2022 NHL draft rankings, counting down from 32 and going all the way up to 1. I'm doing it that way because I do think that my rankings may be actually a little bit surprising, so I think the suspense is something that I kind of want to hold up until the very end to reveal who my top 3 is this year, because some people might be a little surprised as to what I have, but we're going to go ahead and get started with picks 32 to 26 in order here. So with the 32nd pick, the last pick of the first round, or my 32nd ranked prospect, the only goalie I have in round 1 this year, Sergei Ivanov from the MHL in Russia. We've got defenseman Lane Hutton at 31. He played for the U.S. development program last season. Seems to be a pretty good puck-moving defenseman, but I'll have to see more on him to know that for sure. David Goyette, a former first-round pick of the OHL to the Sudbury Wolves, obviously has not gotten to play a game for them yet, which is kind of the case for a few guys here from the OHL, but definitely a guy who shows a lot of speed, a lot of promise there at the center position. Jack Hughes, no, not the Jack Hughes that was drafted first overall back in 2017. This is a winger Jack Hughes, also playing for the U.S. development program. Shows a lot of promise, not nearly the same kind of promise that the other Jack Hughes shows, but yeah, he's definitely a first-round talent if you ask me. Then our first featured player here, the picture shown, is Cutter Gauthier. He's a pretty good offensive player, definitely a guy I want to see more going into this season. He's a guy I wouldn't be surprised to see climb in the rankings with a really good season upcoming. 27th, we've got Casper Lundell, the younger brother of Anton Lundell. Unlike his brother, who is a center for sure, and one of the best face-off guys, Casper is a winger, so a little bit of a different play style, but definitely has the offense to back himself up. And then our 26th pick there is Joel Jansson from the Swedish under-18 league this past season. Had a lot of success there. Looking forward to see what he's able to do in under-20 or even the SHL next year if he gets a chance to play there. All right, looking at our players ranked 25 to 19. We've got Antonin Verreau from the Gatineau Olympique. No, not from the Olympique. Is he? I'll have to double check. He's either Olympique or he's Mooseheads. I know he's one of those two, and he came off a really good season in the Q this past year. Definitely a good showing for a rookie. So definitely a guy to look out for this upcoming season. Fabian Wagner, another Swedish prospect to keep an eye on, had some success in the under-18 last season, so definitely keep an eye out for him. Matthew Ward with the Swift Current Broncos, not a team that has had a lot of prospect success in the past little while, but he, I believe, was either their first overall pick or in the top 5 in the WHL draft not too long ago. And he's on the shorter side. He's 5'7", I think 147 pounds, somewhere in that range. He needs to bulk up a little bit, I think, weight-wise to make the NHL. But again, he's still young. He's got a lot of opportunity to do that. I think he could still grow in height as well. A guy with a lot of speed and offensive production. So at this point in the first round, definitely a guy to keep an eye on. We got Philip Masar, one of the one of the Slovakian prospects going to be selected, I believe, in the first round this upcoming season. I think Slovakia has some really cool prospects to keep an eye out for that we'll be seeing more of as my rankings go on here. But Masar put up like 14 points in like 30 games in the Slovakian men's league this past season. So it'll be interesting to see if he can either improve on that or go to a league that is a bit more challenging for him to see if he can continue his production there. And then we got Centauri Sulku, Finnish forward, who was very successful this past season, I believe, in under 20, but I think He also might have been under 18, but either way, he's definitely a guy with a lot of offensive production, a guy to keep an eye on going forward. Same with Helmer Stiff, a Swedish forward, center forward, guy who was successful in under 18s, so another guy to keep an eye on. And then our highlighted player for this page is Ty Nelson, who was the first overall pick in the OHL draft 2 seasons ago, has yet to have a chance to actually play in the OHL yet with the North Bay Battalion, but it will be very interesting to see what he is capable of once things get going there. He is a bit on the smaller side, not really known for a defensive game, but he's a really dynamic puck mover, so it should be really interesting to see what happens with him. He could either be one of the biggest risers or biggest fallers, I think, in this draft, just because we don't know what to expect with him yet, but obviously with the Junior Canadians he looked fantastic, so something to kind of keep an eye on there. Next we go to our players ranked 18 to 11, so we've got Marco Kasper, a Austrian center who is going to be playing in, I believe, Sweden this next season, so another guy to kind of keep an eye out on. Obviously not the same kind of player that Marco Rossi is coming out of Austria, but definitely another Austrian forward with a lot of upside to keep an eye on going forward. Danilo Uroff, a Russian forward with a lot of skill to keep an eye on for sure. Noah Ostlund, Swedish center, definitely seems to have good offensive production to back up a good two-way game, so another player from Sweden to kind of keep an eye on there. Danny Zilkin, center from the Guelph Storm. I don't know if he's actually played yet for them, or if he last season was supposed to be his rookie season, but he's a guy that has showed a lot of skill. Definitely was really good at the under 18 tournament for Canada. I think he's another guy that could either rise really fast or fall really fast in this upcoming draft, but I've liked what I've seen from him prior to being drafted to the OHL, so definitely a guy to keep an eye on. David Duracek, I really like David Duracek. The points are not flashy with him at all, and for that reason a lot of people and a lot of teams might actually rank him quite a bit lower than what I have here, but he's a nice big physical defenseman. Good frame, great skater. I think he's going to be really hard to play against when he comes to the NHL, and I think somebody out there is going to value him at least as much as I have, and say that this is the type of defenseman that can really solidify a core in the long run. Number 13 here, we got Conor Geeky, the Winnipeg Ice forward, I believe brother of Morgan Geeky, and he was pretty good offensively this past season in the WHL. It'll be interesting to see him improve on that the following season. So definitely a guy to look out for. He's a guy that I could definitely see moving himself up into the top 10, depending on how things go this next year. Ivan Marosh Nachenko is another guy here. He's our highlighted player here. Russian forward. Definitely could see him get into the top 10 this year. He's just a very dynamic winger, can score, can pass, a lot to like about his game, so definitely keep an eye on him as this year rolls on. And the last player outside the top 10 here we have is Frank Nazar, a winger from the U.S. development program. Definitely a good goal scorer, a little bit on the shorter side, but obviously that's not an issue for me personally, as long as they're bulky enough to handle the physicality of the league. It really doesn't matter what their height is. Guy with good speed, good shot, so another guy to definitely keep an eye on. I don't see Nazar moving up from here. Honestly, right now, I think at 11, I have him pretty high. He's a guy that I'm kind of expecting to cool off a bit this year, and for that, I might have to move him down. But, don't be too surprised to see him in my top 10, but I'm just not expecting that to happen this year. All right, so moving on to my top 10, we're starting off with my 10th pick here, which is Joachim Kamel. Joachim Kamel is a very dynamic offensive winger, played in the Finnish under 20 league this past season. He's 5'11", 176, so he's a pretty good size already. Got a lot of speed. I forgot to actually put an NHL comparison there for him, so that's my bad. I'll have to do a bit more research on him. I haven't actually gotten to watch him play. I've just kind of heard good things, seen stats and stuff, and he definitely reminds me of some of the great Finnish players that have been drafted really high in the past little while. He's a guy with a really high ceiling. Definitely a guy to expect to see as a top 6 winger in his career. Moving on to number 9, we got American defenseman Seamus Casey. He is a guy with a lot of offensive upside. He's a little bit on the shorter side, but he's a great skater, good puck mover, good at running the breakout. So right now I have his NHL comparison as Lubomir Wisnowski. For those of you who remember him, he was also a shorter defenseman back in like the I think he retired, I want to say in like 2012 or 13, so it's been a little while since he's been out of the league, but I just always remember him being a very underrated puck mover, very good offensively, and would always be near the top of the league in defensive points at that time. I don't expect Seamus Casey to have quite that same kind of production where he's kind of like a top 10 in points kind of defenseman, but I do expect him to be the kind of guy that can run a power play. Maybe not your first power play depending on who you have defensively, but another guy that I could kind of compare him to today is like Matt Grzelcyk. So like you could say, is Matt Grzelcyk really worth taking in the top 10? Maybe not, but I think Seamus Casey has a bit more of a defensive game to him as well that Grzelcyk doesn't have. So I think that helps me to justify why I have him this high here. Next up, we got Isaac Howard, who is a 5'10", 174 winger. He reminds me a lot of Nikolai Ehlers just because of his speed and size and his dynamic offensive ability. So definitely to get a guy like that at 8 would be really good value. He's a guy who potentially with a really good season, you could see him entering into the top 5, but I think even at this point right now, he's not a guy that people are talking about as a top 10 guy in general. So I think he's a guy that a lot of people will not have on their radar coming into this season, but will definitely be talking about him by the end of this season. A lot to like about the game of Isaac Howard. Number 7, I've got Simon Nemech. Now, for a lot of people, he might be in the 15 to 20 range, and I can respect that, but I've been watching him, and I find that his film does him a lot more justice than what his stats do, because obviously he's playing in Slovakia as men's league, so as a 16 and 17-year-old in a men's league, it's really hard to get ice time and really stand out. But from what I've seen, he reminds me a lot of prime Erik Karlsson with the things that he does. And that might sound absolutely crazy to say about some kid from Slovakia that, isn't lighting the world on fire by any means with his offensive production. But just watching the way that he moves the puck, the way that he holds on to it, what he does in the offensive zone, he just does everything right, in my opinion. I think he has a really high hockey IQ. The way I've compared it is I think that he's like Karlsson with slightly less offense, because I don't expect him to have nearly the, point a game production that Karlsson did have in his prime. But I do expect him to maybe have a bit more of a defensive side to his game. So overall, we might be talking about Nemech as the best defenseman in this class when it's all said and done. Now, I don't have him as my number 1 defenseman, but I think he could move up the list depending on how things go for him this season. I think in the long run, he seems to me right now like the guy who could potentially surprise and be the biggest star from this draft almost. I mean, obviously, that's hard to say with the kind of top-end talent that this draft does have. But I do think he has a really good shot of being the best defenseman in this draft for sure. So at number 6, I have Matthew Savoir. Yes, I have him all the way down at 6. Surprising, I know. He, for most people, is a lock at number 3. Some people have him at number 2. But for me, I think personally, I haven't loved a lot of the things I've heard about him attitude-wise. I mean, nothing too major, obviously. And obviously, you never want to, put too much thought into off-ice, personality and such if a player is extremely talented like he is. But my issue with him is that, first of all, playing in the WHL for a lot of people is an extremely... It's a privilege, obviously, right? And what he said going into his draft year, or the year before his draft year actually, was if they do not give me exceptional status, then I will just go play in the States instead. Now, I get that's advocating for yourself, and I do get that. Personally, I think that the States is, for a lot of players, a better route these days, especially with the decline in talent that the WHL has had. But at the same time, I don't think that that's the kind of statement you want to make publicly, because as a player, you want to go where you are wanted, or at least you want to show that you want to go where you are wanted. And I get that he didn't want to play for a franchise like the Ice at the time when they were in Kootenay and they were not very well run. But then they moved to Winnipeg, and he kind of agreed that, okay, he would go there. But overall, it just, I think it felt a little bit entitled to me. And that's my biggest issue with Savoir. I think he does have a lot of offensive talent. That being said, in the USHL, he didn't exactly light it up. I mean, he was good. No, don't get me wrong. He was really good. But for how people were talking about him and for what people were expecting from him, I don't think he really delivered on all that. Now, you got to give him the benefit of the doubt, obviously, because his move to play in the USHL was kind of last minute, and he just wanted to find a place to play. So obviously he probably didn't get the chance to get settled in right off the bat. Keep in mind, he's a guy with a lot of speed, good hands, he can shoot. I have his comparison as like a better version of Michael Grabner, because when I think of guys who in the past have had a lot of speed and good shots, Michael Grabner is always the first one that comes to mind. Obviously, I think his ceiling is a little bit higher than Michael Grabner's in his prime, but at the same time, I don't think we should expect, because people are grouping him in with Wright and Lambert, right? And I don't think that we should be doing that, because I think that that's a lot of expectation for a guy who I think would disappoint us in that case. At pick 6, I think he's great value. I think that's probably the highest you want to pick him, though. Obviously, if he comes out and has a much different season this year, shows much more dedication to, his team and to, not just using it as a stepping stone to get to the next level, basically, then he's a guy that I would start to consider maybe more of a top 4 guy, but right now he does not make it into my top 5, so... Moving on to Rutger Mcgrawdy. This guy is very fascinating. So obviously he's a little bit hard to evaluate just purely on stats, because in before this past season, which he was very, very good in anyways, but he was playing for the Oakland Grizzlies in I believe that's like AAA midget in the States, and he was insane points wise. I think he had like 160 points in like 50 games played, like 80 of which were goals or something like that. I'd have to double check on a lot of those things, but like it was something absolutely monstrous. And now it's not a league that produces a whole lot of NHL talent, but it's also not a bad league either. It's probably one of the better places to play AAA in the Western States. So really hard to evaluate from that standpoint, but he was really good in the U.S. development program last season as well. For me, he just seems like he has a massive ceiling that he can just absolutely smash through. And, I've got his NHL comparison as prime Corey Perry. Corey Perry's a guy who won a Hart Trophy, and that's something that a lot of people forget about. In his prime, he was able to put over 100 points in the NHL in one season, right? And I think Rutger Mcgrawdy has the chance to be exactly like that. And I think he has, better hands. I think he's probably got a bit more longevity to him, although it'll be interesting to see, because I think he will be a physical guy as well, kind of like Corey Perry. He'd have to put a bit more weight on if he wants to play that similar role. All that being said, he's also a center, so obviously Corey Perry never really played center in his career. So Rutger Mcgrawdy is a guy who can play in both ends of his ice and take faceoffs as well. So the comparison kind of ends there with Corey Perry. But I do think that Rutger Mcgrawdy can be, if everything goes well for him and you get the absolute best out of him that I think he is capable of, I think he's a guy that can win a Hart Trophy in his career. I really do. He has insane offensive capabilities. Moving into my top 4 now, we've got Elias Salmonson, who is the top defenseman I have rated in this draft. He is a good puck mover. I haven't gotten to watch him a whole lot. The film on him at the moment is pretty scarce, so I'll have to see more once we get into the season, but I keep hearing how much of a dynamic two-way defenseman this guy is. Personally, I would want him to put on a little bit more weight. He's a little bit thin at 161, but obviously that's something that will change with time this season. He's a guy who can run your power play and play minutes on the penalty kill. So he's kind of, to me, I'm trying to think of who. What I've seen from him so far, what that reminds me of, but I don't want to make any sort of comparison at the moment because I think it'll become pretty inaccurate once I do actually get to see a bit more of him. But yeah, at the moment, he does definitely seem like a defenseman that would be kind of the safer pick over Nemech. I would say that Nemech, in my opinion, has the higher ceiling and will probably end up over Salmonson at some point in my rankings, but Salmonson just seems kind of like a sure thing to be an NHL top pairing defenseman, whereas Nemech, a lot of things will have to kind of go right for him. And into my very surprising top 3, starting with Yuri Slavkowski. I think that's how you pronounce it. I haven't actually heard it said, but for a lot of people, he's not in their top 5 even, I've seen. But here's what I like about him. He's a big 6'4", 225-pound winger. He's got a ton of offensive skill. You expect a guy that big to potentially not have the speed. No, he's got the speed. He's got the hands. He's got the strength. He reminds me exactly of a young Rick Nash. I mean, you can talk about Rick Nash in his final years and how he wasn't the same kind of dynamic player that he was, but, looking back at the prime of Rick Nash's career, he was one of the best power forwards to ever play the game. And I think Slavkowski can be that or even better, personally. I think that, you compare him to some of the guys who have gone high that are similar players like Brady Tkachuk. I think he's a better player than Brady Tkachuk. I think he's a better player than Matthew Tkachuk. Better player than Chris Kreider, better player than, name a power forward. I think he can be better than them, to be honest. Maybe not Landeskog, although Landeskog might be kind of the, his ceiling, I would say. But, I mean, even Rick Nash in his prime, I would say, was better than current Gabriel Landeskog. So you never know. I do think that Slavkowski has that much skill, that much talent. It'll be interesting to see him. I think he's playing in the Finnish Elite League this upcoming season. And I should mention this was the 3rd Slovakian that I've talked about here in this first round, something that we haven't seen in quite a while. We haven't seen any Slovakians taken in the first round. I don't even know who the last one would have been. I'll have to take a look because it's been so long. This year we could have 3. I think that's awesome for the country of Slovakia. I think that it's always been a great hockey country, but the talent has been declining a little bit over the years, so it's so good to see 3 guys with this kind of top-end talent like Slavkowski, Nemech, and Masar this upcoming season. Anyways, we're going to move on to my number 2, and drumroll please. We know that it's either going to be Shane Wright or Brad Lambert. So who is it going to be? It's Shane Wright. Yeah. Everyone else has Shane Wright number 1. I don't think I know anybody who doesn't have Shane Wright as their clear-cut number 1 overall pick. But I don't see it. I mean, I do see it, actually. That's a lie. Shane Wright is one of the best prospects since, Austin Matthews, Patrick Laine. Well, Patrick Laine hasn't turned out the way that people were hoping, but hype-wise, to make that comparison, obviously, he put up numbers in his rookie season that were comparable to like Connor McDavid, John Tavares. So a lot of things to be excited about with Shane Wright, and I think that the hype for him is only going to get bigger and bigger as this OHL season goes on. Expect him to absolutely dominate this league and just put the world on notice that Shane Wright is coming to the NHL. That being said, the fact that he's number 2 is not at all a slight on him at all. I think that, from what I've seen from him, he uses the ice so incredibly well. The way he sees the ice reminds me of Sidney Crosby. Now, I'm not going to go as far as to say he's going to be as good as Sidney Crosby. Not that that's out of the question, because there is that much talent there. But what I do compare is just, if you've watched Sidney Crosby in the offensive zone and you've seen him controlling the puck and just finding the open areas on the ice to create scoring chances, he can just do it in a way that you just don't even understand how he knows what's happening. That's what I see from Shane Wright. He has had some plays in the OHL where I honestly didn't even think the defense were making mistakes, or they were, but they were split-second mistakes, and Shane Wright was able to capitalize on them just like that, just turn and shoot and use the space that he's being given. His use of space is just insane, and I think that's what makes him such a good player. Speed-wise, shot-wise, all those things, they're things that aren't super spectacular about him, and they don't have to be the way that he plays, because he's just that smart, and I can see him becoming somebody who is really responsible in the defensive zone in the NHL. Just a guy who, he'll get a lot of points. Expect him to be in the 70 to 80 point range on a consistent basis once he gets into his prime. But beyond just that, his skill will show up on the analytics as well, and he'll be a guy who contributes a lot to Corsi. He's going to be a guy who contributes a lot to zone entries and wins above replacement is going to be the big one as well. So definitely a dynamic player for whoever gets the opportunity to draft him, and definitely not a guy that I would be surprised to see first overall, even though he's not my first overall guy. My first overall guy has been, and I believe forever will be, Brad Lambert. Now, I am certainly always open to changing my mind on these things, but there's just, I've never seen a prospect like Brad Lambert with the kind of skill, speed, shooting, just everything about him is just so dynamic, and he's the kind of guy that will offensively just absolutely change a franchise. To me, he's a guy who I believe can score 100 points consistently in the NHL. He can work a power play, work the odd man rush, all these things. He's got good vision. He doesn't just score goals. He's a really good passer of the puck. And my comparison for him here is a little bit of John Tavares, which is obviously high praise, and the much higher praise that I have is Teemu Selanne. Usually when I throw a guy's name around like Teemu Selanne, I will say, I don't think he'll be as good as Teemu Selanne, but I think that that's what I see in him, is that kind of skill set. This time I'm actually going to say I see him being as good as Teemu Selanne. I know that's a really hot take, because Teemu Selanne, best Finnish player to ever play in the game, potentially best European to ever play in the game, if you want to even throw it that far. He's a guy who, he holds the record for most goals and points scored in a rookie season. He had 76 goals as a rookie. Obviously, it's a different league. I'm not expecting Brad Lambert to take the world by storm that quickly, but I do think that he's the kind of guy that, can play like Teemu Selanne played in the prime of his career. And he's a guy who's going to have a lot of success and bring whatever team he plays for a lot of success. So let me know what you guys think of my rankings down below. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people telling me that I'm wrong for having Brad Lambert as high as I do and being as high on him as I am. There's going to be a lot of people telling me that Shane Wright is the guy, and I don't disagree with you. I think Shane Wright would be an amazing first overall pick. The thing is, there's just so many guys this year that I think have the skill set to be a first overall pick. Like, we look at the draft from last season, with the exception of William Eklund, I didn't really think anyone in that draft was worth using a first overall pick on, compared to this draft here. And I think Eklund in this draft would probably go 4th or 5th on my rankings. That's just how good I think the top end talent of this draft is. So again, let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you like this type of video, make sure you consider subscribing and dropping a like.